Okay, so Scott, let's start. Talk to me about kind of where you are with this book and what's this is a super important book, by the way. This is an important book with an important topic. So
Oh, thank you.
yeah,
Yeah, I hope so. I mean,
yeah,
I think so myself. So yeah,
yeah. So where's the book at? Like what stage is it in? What
it
steps are you
is.
looking at?
It's with an editor right now,
Oh,
and
great.
um, she sent me the first edits, and I'm going through them, and then we'll be kind of going back and forth like that for a little bit. But
Yeah.
she felt, at least for the things that I sent her so far, the first half of it was really clean, and felt like we'd be able to get this thing done pretty quickly. So
Good.
I'm excited about it.
That's great. So kind of moving into the final, I can tell as I read it that you're moving into the final stages of editing, which is nice.
Oh, good,
Yeah.
good.
It looks that way. Like I left you notes, but
Yes, you did.
just so you know, the notes are more preference and less like you have to fix this for this to be a good book.
No, but
Like
they're
it's
good
yeah.
points, Jeff. I don't
Okay.
want anybody to, I mean, that's what I'm depending on you for is, or, my editor to tell
Yeah.
me what is not working as well as what is working.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, do you want to go through the notes like big things to small things, or you just want to go in order on the page? What's going to be most helpful?
Um, Maybe kind of just going through the beginning to the
Okay.
end.
And was there anything you really wanted to hit? Like anything you're like, I want to make sure we absolutely talk about this thing.
Well, I do have a question for you,
Yeah.
right out of the get-go.
Yeah.
And that is, you had asked at the very end, is this the end of the book? And I wasn't sure if you meant like, is this it? Or, you were just do you just wanted to qualify that?
The book wraps like the end of the chapter wraps like you're closing.
Like there's something else that's going to happen?
No, like you're like
Oh,
issuing a challenge to the reader
oh, yes.
as a conclusion to the book. So that's
That's
what I was
exact.
asking. Okay.
That's exactly what I was trying to do.
Okay. So this is this the last chapter?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. That really helps. I'm going to encourage you to build it out a little bit more at the end, but that helps me to know that we're in the last chapter.
Okay.
Um, okay. So can you see, I put the book on the screen. Can you see it? Okay.
Yes.
Let me blow it
If
up a
I
little
can
bit.
enlarge it a little bit. Let me
Yeah, that's
see.
what I was about to say. That's a little
Uh,
better.
oh, there, that's better.
Okay.
Okay.
Um, what is why are you underlining things?
Okay. I guess did you get my results from the questions that you asked me?
No, I did not. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, no problem.
I've been at the day
Um,
job all day, so I haven't looked at anything. Yeah.
the day job. Your day job is doing this, isn't it?
No, I wish. I have
I,
another day job.
I understand. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
No, the reason why it's underlined is because it was supposed to be italicized.
Okay.
And I used Scrivener for this, and I'm not a
Okay.
Scrivener expert. So everything that was supposed to be in italics ended up being underlined.
Okay. I have another question then.
Yes.
Well, I don't have a question, I have a comment. Um, you're using italics in three different ways. And I'm going to encourage you in your book. I mean, I would actually encourage you to talk to your editor about this. Pick italics can really only mean one thing, maybe two. There's other tools you can use, right? Like you can use all caps, you can use bold, you can use underlining, you can use things in quotations, but right now, if everything that's underlined right now is in italics, you're using italics to quote other people at the
Yes.
beginning, like when you have a standalone quote. You're using italics for emphasis.
Yes.
And you're also using italics when you have a journal entry, like here, when you're reading your own journal entry.
Exactly.
That it's gonna get confusing for a reader as to what italics mean. It's almost one of those things of like, if you use them for too much, they start to mean nothing.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
So I would probably not use them. Like, I might use them for your own journal entries and to quote other people. But when you're like emphasizing a word,
Uh-huh.
I might put it all in caps.
Okay.
So like here, this would look like, and I don't know, part of this, Scott, again, I'm telling you, the chapter's great. This is me like nitpicking, but I'm an editor. You give an editor something, you say edit, we find problems. So, so
No, that's cool. And in looking at this, I know that there's a lot of underlining that it does start losing its meaning.
yeah, so like I think like something like this, like after all the work I'd been doing and trying to understand why I had had this relationship with that, like you can capitalize it like that. You're already using bold for something, so I've actually seen people also do this where, and I don't know that Scrivener will allow this, but sometimes if you're translating it into another program, it'll let you do this, where you actually use a different font
Okay.
for words that are being emphasized. Um, it's up to you, like how you want to do it, but I think you're losing something in everything being in italics.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, I'm putting it back now.
no, no,
Yeah.
you're spot on.
Yeah, so that would be my first comment. And I think your journal entries and these pull quotes being in italics makes a lot of sense. So I would probably leave those. Um, I love that you have these. Part of, I think, what's hard about a memoir like yours is that you have, and I remember this from when I read your other chapters, you have kind of like teaching point, scene, and then like conclusion. Are the chapters still kind of formatted that way?
I think so.
Yeah, I love that you're using bold here to pull out your teaching points. I think that's really smart. And you've bolded good things. Like in this chapter, eating disorders are about managing unbearable feelings. That's a great kind of like, if I were to skim this trying to decide if I wanted to read it or not, that's a good kind of summary statement to the chapter. Or this one, my body and preoccupation with food weren't the problems, they were the symptoms of unrelated, raw, and uncomfortable underlying emotions and beliefs. That sentence really does sum up the whole chapter. So it's a great bold pull quote. Um, are you trad publishing this or self-publishing this?
Well, I was going to self-publish it.
Okay.
Which I guess I'm still going to do, but it would be nice to think I could try to publish it as well. So
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, trad asking if you're going to trad publish it is always a weird question because that's not actually up to us.
right.
It's not like we can just make that happen. Um, if you end up doing more book formatting, you might you might unbold these. I can see this kind of thing where you unbold these and then you put them in like a pull quote almost where they stand out in the middle of the page.
Uh-huh.
A lot of leadership books do this, um, where they stand the quote out in the middle of the page and then it's like uh centered and like made bigger and kind of stands out like that. Does that make sense?
Sure it does. Yeah.
Yeah, that might be
I like
something
that.
because you're picking such strong summary points, that might be something you try.
Okay.
Um, I don't know. It depends how much book formatting you want to do. I know whenever I come to a book that you've been working on, like whenever I have a book that I've worked on as long as you've been working on this book, I'm often like, I don't want to format anything. Like I just want to be done.
You just want to be done. I
Yeah.
hear
So it depends on how much you want to do. Um,
that's kind of the icing on the cake. So it's not as hard for me to do as the first draft was for, you know.
Nice. Good. Um, Part of the reason I want you to think about doing pull quotes like that, where you're like busting them out, or other times publishers will actually do this. They'll cut them, um, and they'll put them in a text box. That is, sorry, they'll put them in a text box that is separate from the text itself,
Uh-huh.
and bold it, like change the font, make it stand out. This is another real common thing in like leadership memoirs or leadership books. And then they just like put it on the side of a paragraph. Does
Right.
that
I've
make
seen that.
sense?
Sure.
Yeah. And then they outline
So
the, yeah,
so you see it twice. You see it in the body of the writing, and it stands off by the side.
exactly. And it ends up being something that like people can skim and be like,
Right.
oh, I see this point. Part of the reason I'm spending time having you think about this is because right now my biggest edit for you is that your paragraphs are huge.
Okay.
And so in addition to like playing with these pull quotes, um I'm going to make some recommendations about paragraph spacing, but more and more I'm finding books that I'm reading avoid large paragraphs.
Yes.
And part of it is I think we read on our phones so much now, and we read on screens, like tablet size screens so much. Large paragraphs can really lose the reader.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So like these are just two of the memoirs I read this year. This is the or I've read in the last year. This is The Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes. When we get into her, but you can see how she's avoiding big paragraphs. Even though this is all just prose. It's not a scene. It's just prose, but she's breaking her paragraphs into these rhythmic, smaller bits to avoid, I think, to avoid that having giant paragraph after giant paragraph on the page. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Or this one is here's Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights,
Yeah.
another memoir, kind of memoir to teach is what I would call both of these, like memoirs with a point. And you can see, like, even though this isn't a scene, he spaced it like people are talking,
Okay.
even though it's not a scene, right? Like you can see how, and he's using different colored text here and bold in order to really break up. You see, he doesn't have any large paragraphs. Um, oh, that's the end of my sample. But so I think finding ways like pulling those quotes out to break up the text. Now that makes seeing it on a phone harder when you pull those kind of blocks out. It's nice for a paperback. It's hard to see it. But even like what I was doing, like popping that quote out in a larger font in the middle with spacing between the paragraphs,
Uh-huh.
will help break up some of these larger paragraphs for you and make it a little I think more readable,
Okay.
just to the eye. The prose, and again, Scott, I want to tell you, like, the prose is great, the writing's strong. This isn't a critique of the writing. It's a like, hey, modern readers struggle with large paragraphs, so if we
I
can bust them up. Yeah.
We have a short attention span, you know, and
Hmm.
and looking at a large paragraph almost makes your eyes glaze over.
You start to scroll and
Right.
skim, and you're like, where's the next, like, where, and I think there's also a defeatist feeling where like I've had readers say this to me, they're reading big chunk after big chunk after big chunk, and they feel like they're not getting very far because the book is just this chunked out.
Yeah.
And so they want to be making progress. They want to be moving. So they like it if it's more scrollable. Again, it's not a comment on the writing. The writing's great, but it's just like, how do we put this writing in its best format to deliver it so that readers will engage with it?
Right. I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right here, I want another example. So you have this great paragraph here. My insecurities, fears, and inherent shortcomings gave birth to the eating disorder, which gnawed within me like a bloody, hungry parasite pretending to protect me. I initially fell for the trap, but eventually came to realize the real intent of the eating disorder was to nourish itself at my expense. The disorder's illogical thoughts and unyielding maladaptive behaviors became the symptom of everything I wanted to change within myself. And then you go into the next, comparing it to like alcohol addiction or gambling addiction.
Right.
Right here, I would love to have because this is the last chapter, I'd love to have a personal recall of stories you've told.
Right.
I don't need the whole story. I just need to be like, it was like when blank, and it was like when Y, and it was like when Z, and it was like when the, because as the closing chapter, we need to start pulling all those other chapters into this one. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Sure it does. Yeah.
Because you're wrapping the book, so we need to be going back in moments like this where you have this big, deep culmination thought. We need to be showing how you've set that thought up through the rest of the book.
I got it. It's not bringing in something new. It's bringing in example of something I've already covered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Okay.
that you have that, right? Like this is a, are there places in the book where you can refer back to be like,
Oh,
it's like this?
absolutely.
Yeah.
The book is
Okay, good.
really kind of vignettes that all have a central theme.
I remember from when I read the chapters before about you getting a new apartment and driving around town, and um man, it's weird that I remember this. That was like a year and a half ago.
I'm
Um
amazed, honestly.
yeah, I'm surprised too. They're good chapters, man.
Oh,
But the like, those vignettes I read, um I want you to pull back to those with like a sentence for each one. And I don't want a paragraph here. I want it to look like, just making up material, but I want it to look like, um, it's like when I tried to get X thing and ate and ate, you know, a ton instead.
right.
And then, if you can give me like three of them, it's like when I, you know, did Y thing.
Okay.
It's like when I experienced X thing. It's like when I did, A, B, and C thing.
Okay.
Like the alcoholic, compulsive gambler, or drug addict, the problems aren't about the booze, the games, or the drugs. Does that make sense? So, like, if we can get those one sentence
And you can leave that
descriptions.
if you want to leave your
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll leave
things
them.
in there.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I see what you're talking about. I actually did that, not defending myself, but
No,
I've
no,
done
no.
it in other parts of the book,
Yeah.
um, but this is a perfect place to do it right now.
Yeah. And it starts to give the feeling of like we're wrapping up here. Like
Exactly.
we're culminating here. Summarizing. And it breaks up. You can kind of see with your eye how this breaks up that big paragraph motif, right? Putting this kind of list in here. There's a couple other places I'm going to ask you to do this where you're just having one sentence paragraphs,
Okay.
like we saw Shonda Rhimes in The Year of Yes and Matthew McConaughey doing in Green Lights, having to make it feel. I I call this. I don't know if other people call it this, but I call it this. I may have gotten this from somewhere else. I call this conversational spacing, because what you're doing is you're taking the spacing of dialogue. where a person A speaks, person B speaks, person A speaks, person B speaks, and you're just applying it to prose. And it gives the prose the energy of dialogue, right?
Hmm.
Like it keeps the prose moving, makes us feel like we're getting that energy from finishing things on the page quickly. Um, so you get the benefits of dialogue without actually having dialogue. Does that make
Right.
sense?
It gets away from the exposition look.
Yeah, the exposition dump of like, oh man, how many paragraphs is this thing? If we can
Right.
start spacing it like this, where we've got these one sentence hits, we get the feeling that we're really moving through this thing. And that's
Yeah.
what readers want. They want to feel like they're learning and moving through. Here's another big paragraph, right? You
Yeah.
can see there's probably like 5 sentences in this paragraph. Now, again, the paragraph is excellent. I wouldn't change any of the words. The words are great. It's really well, your writing here is fantastic. Even just finding places though to create false paragraphs.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
like,
That's been an issue of mine, Jeff, is where do you start a new paragraph? I mean, I'm used to it like being a new scene or a
yeah,
complete new thought.
grammatically this is correct.
Right.
Right? This is what it should look according to the rules of grammar, this is what it should look like. But you all when you're writing this kind of in modern writing, what I'm seeing more and more is there's a musicality to it,
Yeah.
to where you as the author are looking for the things that you want to stand out, and you're making them your own paragraph. So like for this, you like, from my observations, the feeling of being powerless and out of control without skills or knowledge of how to deal with the deep-seated issues can only be addressed through complete cessation of the substance abuse, along with the non-destructive distractions and learning healthy coping skills. That's a great comprehensive sentence.
Okay.
This is true for most addictions. So this is where I might do it. You've got a
Right.
big sentence there. This is true for most addictions. And then I might go ahead and break grammatical rules and go, where the individual has relied on unsuitable potential disastrous coping mechanisms to survive. That's a bad place to break it. But I might make this its own paragraph, right? This is
Yeah.
true for most addictions, where the individual has relied on potential disastrous coping mechanisms to survive.
And then
Oh,
at the
sorry.
end it says, what makes an eating disorder so difficult to deal with is its necessity of that could be like one of those offset.
Yeah, you could totally offset this and like put it in the middle. But again, we're just trying to find ways to break up the prose so that it just is giving the reader's eye a little bit of change. So can you tell the difference between what we just did than how it looked as a single block of a paragraph?
Oh, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and by what you're saying, like just taking, I didn't even do anything but space down and center it. Now this really stands out. Like, what makes an eating disorder so difficult to deal with is the necessity of eating, the very thing we are so uncomfortably consumed with. Right. And now we're back into this imagine alcoholic, totally like this now we have this final paragraph, and then we're into the scene.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
So, and I would, as you're doing your edit through with your editor, one, I would ask your editor how they feel about this, because you're paying them money. So, so
Well,
get
I
there.
am paying them money, right?
Yeah,
So
that's what
they
I said. Like, you're paying them. So
get
yeah, ask them their take on this, see what they think. And then as you go through your edit, I might start doing this kind of spacing.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and then this is just a quick note. The voice here felt a little formal. Um,
And what I responded to you on was uh, I tried to make when like a therapist speak or
okay.
spoke, speak.
Yeah.
when a therapist speaks, I tried to make it sound more professional. So I didn't use
Perfect.
contractions and things.
Okay.
That was the only reason.
Yeah, as long as it's intentional, right? Like
Yes.
that's always the question is like, if this is intentional, fantastic. If it's not
Right.
intentional, then we need to look at it. As long as it's intentional, it's great. Um, yeah, I love putting this. You got this in the in somebody's mouth here. So this is a really big point. We all have different abilities and levels of need for control, some which lead us to an eating disorder, while others develop different coping skills. I love that you are getting this in a character's mouth. It would be
No.
really easy to like just pontificate an exposition. Nice job getting a scene in here to put this in.
Oh,
Um, this is another one of those places where I want that conversational spacing, where I'm just grammatically, your spacing was correct.
okay.
But what I'm doing here is just so you know, if you want to do it in other places in the book, you have Joanne speaks, she says what I just read, and then you have an inner thought. Pondering what Joanne just explained, I sat for a few minutes thinking it through. My body and desire to control it was merely the symptom, not the problem, I repeated to myself. And then you had this all in one paragraph. I'm going to take your response to your thought as if it's two different people talking. So, to
Hmm.
alleviate the real issue, disorder eaters lean on distractions like focusing on their body, image, food, and numbers on the scale as ways to cope. Makes sense, I said. So, I'm just to give more of that dialogue type spacing, I'm going to take the advantage of separating your inner thought as if it was its own character
Okay.
and giving it its own line of its own paragraph. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Now, if this were a novel,
Yes.
I would tell somebody to break this big utterance up.
Okay.
So she says, in reply to you, she says, yes, exactly. These symptoms are distractions from discomfort of not knowing how else to live with the thoughts, feelings, and insecurities that oppress them. And then I would, if this were a novel, I'd have you be like, okay, I said, processing the information.
Okay.
Initially, the obsession with our body, our food, and everything associated with eating disorders is a safe place for us to hide. She continued, but eventually the strict limitations from adhering to behaviors and rituals. So you can see all I'm doing here is taking that big paragraph and I'm trying to bring some more reader engagement to it by making them feel like they're in the room.
Yes.
Yeah. Now
Makes a
this
lot
is
of sense.
this is memoir. So I don't know how comfortable you are throwing in like little assertions like that.
Oh,
Um
no, I think that's great because that makes
okay.
it sound real.
Yeah, and that's what we want. We want these sections that are scenes to sound like real conversations.
Exactly.
Yeah. So and again, you're writing solid. It sounds like a therapist talking to somebody, but there's a like it sound this is actually that huge paragraph is something I could totally see a therapist saying in real life. I've had therapists who just drone on for like 10 minutes. Well, I'm nodding. I'm like, uh-huh. So but I think when we're putting it on the page, there's an element where we need to suspend reality in
Hmm.
order to bring the interaction because it's not a movie, right? Like if it were a movie, we would see you nodding as the therapist is talking. But because it's all in the words on the page, we have to take those pauses that show your affirmation to kind of break things up. Does that make
Sure.
sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, these are well taken. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And again, man, I'm picking. I'm being nitpicky
Oh,
because
no, I want it readable, you know?
yeah. Yeah, the content's too important to not have it readable. Here again, I'm breaking up your content in different paragraphs just to make it more digestible. Suddenly the words which seem to ebb with meaning over time galvanized to become motivators and guiding posts through recovery I'd been seeking. Paragraph down. I thought about the car I totaled in a blackout trying to avoid the pizza. And I might do the list spacing here. I thought about the restrictions I'd placed on so many foods. Um, and I might just go ahead and do like, I thought about following Ed's rules and rituals, my obsession with the body. Now, I know this isn't grammatically correct, but if we can put it in this list form, it starts
Mhm.
to feel like a staccatoed, you know, it emphasizes the summarizing you're doing here.
Yeah, right.
Does
Which
that
is
make
what you were
sense?
referring to earlier.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to earlier. I'd probably do it here too.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
just pound it out as a list to kind of hammer home like we've talked about this and 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 we've talked about this. Just to communicate to the reader like this is a summary section and where I'm laying out for you all of these points that I've made. Um
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. And a lot of times when you do that kind of spacing in a book like this, um, and again, this is formatting. You'll, this is like a formatting tricks, but this after you do that list, this is the one that gets centered, right? My life may have not gone the way I would like to this point, but deep inside, I could feel the intense desire to live, to an expanding, productive, meaningful life. Like, but again, this is just about taste and what you like and what you don't like. It doesn't, there's no right or wrong way to do this. Does that make sense?
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. In fact, by telling you to make that list, I'm actually probably making all um, the grammar lovers who will read this book go, no. So
Well, that's I just read about a lady that wrote a memoir who went from past tense to present tense to future tense and all these, broke all the rules, and she won some huge award for it.
yeah,
And
yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of times we get stuck on the rules like this is how it has to be, but the truth is rules are just reader expectations. That's all they are. They're like the reader expects this. And breaking rules is about defying reader expectations. If you can do it in an artful way that enhances the reader's experience, then readers will love it. Like their
that,
readers don't care if there are rules or not. They just want to understand what's going on.
you you got that right.
Yeah. And the expectations are like, okay, I know what's going on if these things happen. So you can always break expectations as long as it enhances the reader's ability to tap into what's happening. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, it really does.
Yeah. We've talked, I thought these pages were great. I didn't really have any notes for you. They're well written. The points come in really well. It's a really strong ending. Here's another place where if this were a novel, I'd want you to break this up. Freedom, I said without hesitation. Tell me more about that. Being free from the restrictions I've placed on myself and the rules I want in the years. Okay. What does that mean to you?
Hmm.
I want peace of mind for life and meaning of purpose. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
By letting the therapist have a couple more exchanges in here, it
right.
actually emphasizes your final point.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it drives it home. Um,
Yeah,
and again, it gives you the energy. So now you can kind of feel that energy more like freedom, I said without hesitation. Tell me more about that. Being free from the restrictions and rules I've placed on myself over the years. Okay, what does that mean to you? I want peace of mind and for my life to have meaning and purpose and other worry about what I'm eating or weighing. I feel like I live in a box that keeps closing in on me, squeezing the life and light out of my world. Can you hear how like that by putting her little meaningless encouragements for elaboration, it actually emphasizes everything you're saying.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it just sounds more realistic. Yeah.
Sounds more realistic. It's a little more engaging for the user. Again,
Yeah.
I'd only do it where you have these big, like you had three pretty meaty sentences in a single utterance. So you had being free from the restrictions and rules. You had freedom. I said without hesitation, being free from the restrictions and rules I've placed on myself over the years. I want peace of mind and for my life to have meaning and purpose other than it starts to feel like a speech. And you can hear me as I'm reading it running out of breath.
I hear you.
And
Yeah.
so anytime you have a big speech like that, especially from your character, break it up. Try to find
Okay.
ways, even if you don't want to put words into anybody's mouth, and you just want them to be like, she nodded at me as I spoke.
Yeah. Like you said, body language at
Yeah.
once.
Yep. Body language is great. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, any questions about that? We've talked about that twice now. Any questions about how to do that or what I'm
No,
looking
well
for? Okay.
taken. Well taken. I love it.
Okay, great. Scott, you're making this super easy, man. Um, this is the place where things get a little muddy, specifically the transition here to CBT. So,
Yeah.
um, she says, great question. I suppose that's why I'm here. Or you say, I suppose I, I'm frustrated that I can't get good working definition of a recovery that would follow. And then it has you skimming through the pages of the plan you started years ago. Are you doing this while she's sitting there? Like, is that your intention that this is part of this scene?
Um, that's a good question. It really, I am, but I wouldn't have it with me probably. And nor would I be skimming through it while I'm paying her $200 an hour. So,
If you want it to be part of the scene, you'd be like, you know, she sat in silence, waiting for me to process. I skimmed, right? Like that would be a way
yeah.
to do it. I skimmed through the pages of the plan I started years ago. I couldn't go beyond for the first things. If you don't want to do it that way, where it's there, you can say like, later on my own, I, later on my own, skimming through the pages of the plan I'd started years ago, I couldn't get beyond some of the first things of the radar.
Yeah,
So,
then it becomes because then I jump back into our conversation.
yeah, and
I,
this is
I
where
like,
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, I just kind of like the first way you put that better.
Okay. Yeah, so I'd have something about like, she nodded and waited for me to process more.
Mm-hmm.
Um I skimmed through the pages of the plan I'd started years ago. I can be on some of the first things I'd learned and here. And then you come back to it here, which is like you pull us back into the scene here. Pausing for a moment, I shook my head as I read. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of CBT. So you mentioned CBT, then that's where it got muddy, was like, I'm not sure why, if we were to pull this section out. Great question. I suppose that's why I'm here. I'm frustrated that I can't get a good working definition of what recovery I should follow. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of CBT. That makes sense. But when you pull me out with this reading, it's it gets muddied. So I might add one more thing here of like pausing for a moment. I shook my head as I read. I picked the therapy that everyone had recommended to me stood out on the page. To be honest, I'm
Okay.
not a fan of CBT. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
giving me some transition back into the conversation. I
Yes.
think,
Yes.
yeah. How does that feel?
Yeah. Oh, much better. And then I started wondering, well, do I need to even explain what CBT is? I mean, do I need to go into depth about this is a psychoanalytic blah 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 that, and
Have you
I
talked about it earlier in the book?
not really.
Okay. I'm a firm believer that in your last chapter, no new information is introduced.
Right, right.
You're not allowed to give me new things in the last chapter. It's all about conclusion and summary. So I would not explain. If you haven't explained what it is, I wouldn't explain it here.
Okay.
Because that's not the point. The point isn't about CBT. The point is
Right.
about recovery skills, right? Like
Exactly.
it's just a springboard to talk about recovery. So I wouldn't live with it more than you do.
Okay.
Because this is really what you're getting to, right? That's why I emphasize so much in treatment. I ask, like, then why is it emphasized so much in treatment? This is what you want. Treatment is about giving you the variety of tools to help you navigate. Some will resonate and some will not. Like that's where you're trying to go with this whole CBT thing. So I would just leave it
Okay.
light and go ahead and get there.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Here, as we move forward, you start responding to her with yes. We almost never use that word. It's a weird thing that we write all the time, but when people talk, we skip it. So the way we talk is, you say, so I'm in a skills buffet line picking and choosing what works for me. You have, yes, that is a good way to put it. There is no specific way your recovery plan must look. How we typically talk is that is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
We don't say yes, right? Like, so I started cutting them
No,
whenever
I'm
she
glad you
said it.
did.
Yeah.
Glad you
Um,
did.
you can always put them back because you are going for formality in her language. But it's just something we as people do. We truncate the opening of our sentences.
Yeah.
Um,
No, they're useless words too. I mean, you don't, the way
yeah.
I learn, you don't add useless words. I mean, you
Well,
try to be
sometimes you do because useless words make it sound more realistic. Like
right.
if you get a character like me that's a talker, I'm going to repeat myself so much. I'm going to have so many useless words. I'm going to say the same thing over and over and over again. I'm just going to keep hammering it home until everybody is sick of me just saying the same thing over and over. Right? Like if you're writing me as a character, that's how I'm going to talk. And you're going to break it up with a lot of different body language. But you just know, like Jeff repeats himself. Um, this is, so you can add useless words. It just has to be authentic to the voice.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know
There
that
you go. Yeah.
I don't know that these are authentic to her voice, but
Okay.
yeah. Again, here's another place where there's kind of a big speech happening. You could give me some body language here to break it up. Like a recovery plan, like recovery itself is not static. It is dynamic and continually evolving. She leaned forward. Um, to make sure I was paying attention. I presume you'll always be adding and tweaking your initial plan. Or you could be like, she leaned back in her chair and smiled at me. I presume you'll always be adding and tweaking your initial plan to conform to your needs at the time. Contrary to your eating disorder, your recovery plan is flexible, right? Like, but you can see how like adding a little body language in there breaks that utterance and keeps us pulled into this scene.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just it just creates a little bit different pacing, you know, drags us in a little bit.
Gotcha.
Um, Here's another one of those sentences I found that was like, I want this to stand out. I thought back, not because it's important, but because it breaks up a large paragraph. I
Hmm.
thought back, and it's another one of those places where you're actually in conversation with your inner thoughts. So we're gonna have the inner thoughts stand out as its own character. I thought back to Steve Jobs' Think Different campaign and smiled to myself how easy it was to forget the basics. My heart raced as I frantically scribbled a few notes in my notebook. Right? Like, so this is the thought you're having. If
Yeah.
we're going to do CBT, this is the thought you're having. This is the feeling that thought inspired.
There
This is
you
the
go.
action coming out of that, triggered by that thought. Sorry, that's just me playing with CBT.
No, so
But yeah,
you would just put that as a separate
I just make
paragraph.
them a separate paragraph. Yeah, just, and again, it's not, it was grammatically correct how it was, but I'm just trying to figure out how to take your big paragraphs and break them up a little bit.
Oh yeah, and
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's another one here. With pen and paper, I glared at the blank page, waiting for inspiration. Inspiration turned to perspiration as I waited for the right words to come. Minutes passed as I struggled to fill the page. This is another place where I'd like set that out because it's something you're doing. You have a big thought here, and then this is something you're doing in the present. I'd make it its own paragraph. And then here's more of that list spacing. How
Mm-hmm.
was I going to make this plan mine? What was I going to add to my current plan that was going to be a guiding post for my own recovery? I rub my weary eyes, right? Like, so I'm taking that 2 point list and making them their own paragraphs.
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Um,
Yeah.
sorry, were you going to say something?
No, I see where that is pertinent.
And it just makes it just, again, we're just talking about like making it easier to read. Um,
Yeah.
here's another way. Here's the other kind of spacing I was talking about before, like popping those things out so they stand out. Originally, you had this all in one paragraph,
Mm-hmm.
but this is like, we're really coming to the end here. We're on the last page. So like, let's really hammer home. Recovery is an eating, a recovery from an eating disorder is difficult. Let that just, like, that's a heavy statement. Let it just stand there. This may be why many seeking help have had multiple attempts, possible multiple visits to treatment centers, and ongoing support from nutritionists, therapists, and family and friends. Recovery is a journey which looks different for everybody. So let it stand there.
Mm-hmm.
There's no simple or easy way to step around it. So let it stand there. Right. Like, and now we can come into the final paragraphs.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I like this as the start of your kind of like ending summary. Like, I've had my successes.
Mm-hmm.
I like this. I've had many individuals over the years. Uh, and I like this as like your, although I sought help early on, like this is a summary of the journey you've taken us on. I think it's
But
a great way to wrap.
too much. Too much in that paragraph.
It's a big paragraph,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's a huge paragraph. Again, I don't think I'd cut any of the words. I'd just space it out some.
I
You
got you.
know, the
Uh-huh.
1970s were actually not golden years. And then I'd be like, I've made tremendous progress in my recovery over the, if you read it out loud, Scott, you'll find your breaks. Anytime you take a breath, make a
Yeah.
paragraph, right?
Okay.
Like, and again, this, what you have, the large paragraph, and I'm just going to keep affirming you, the large paragraph is grammatically correct,
Yes.
but we're just creating a different way for the reader to engage with it. And then
Perfect.
this is another one where I do the like standout. Overall,
Yeah.
my life is busy, fulfilling, and gratifying. And I'm so grateful for the transcendence from my many days of years of recognition locked up within myself. Right? That's a beautiful way to end your experience in the book. So I'd let it stand, spaced out from things.
Okay.
Um, here you have one paragraph of a charge. I invite you to join me. And this is where I was like, I want more. If this is the end of the book, I want more. I invite you to join me for reclaiming your life of slavery. You may be encountering unwanted thoughts, food, exercise, and images. Again, the spacing will help. It begins with acceptance of your situation, having the courage and strength, and surrendering your higher power, your team. If I was able to find recovery and peace of mind after the plus side, then then I hold out hope that whoever reads this book can do so as well, even better. And then I like, get personal here for me for like just a sentence or two. Like, it's going to be hard. It's going to require work, but this is your life and it's
And it's
worth,
going to be worth it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's worth saving, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Absolutely.
Give me like that emotional touch at the end that can really bring the book home.
Yeah, I love that. That's
Yeah.
great.
Um,
Perfect. Yeah.
yeah, overall though, man, your writing's great. It is, I think you're at that place of editing where it's like, how do I make these great thoughts I have and this great message I have to communicate to people? How do I make it better digestible for a reader?
Hmm.
And knowing that as readers, we're lazy. So you got to deal with us, right? Like, yeah.
No, and when I personally look at a book and there's just long pages of uninterrupted exposition, I don't want to read it.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a trick. This is less for you and just for other people. Here's a trick I will do with authors sometimes to figure out what their book should look like. Because I'll get pushback on this. I'll be like, hey, you need to space out your book. And they're like, no, 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 I'm fine. So pull up an incognito tab, right? So that Amazon isn't tracking who you are. Go to Amazon.com and then it's making me type in this weird thing.
Yeah.
And then tell Amazon.com, right? Like best selling memoirs.
Okay.
And it's going to give you like, hey, those are sponsored results. Don't do sponsored results. But like, Sound of Gravel, the editor's pick, or The Glass Castle, a memoir book, published this year. Great. Let's take a look at it. Everything I'm doing right now is free. It doesn't cost me anything. I want to see when it was published. Is it recent? Let's make sure it wasn't like published in the 1930s. 2006. So it's a little bit older, but let's just see what they're doing in their formatting, right? And let's see what Janet Walls did in her book that engaged readers well. Um, she's
I,
got, again, she's busting up her paragraphs, right? Like we've got a paragraph that's just a sentence. She's got some longer prose here. She's into dialogue within the second page. But you can just look at it and see like, oh, yeah, and that's the end of her chapter, right? Like, yeah, this engaged a reader. Shorter paragraphs, tighter prose, using some spacing. She's not using the like, kind of fancier spacing that like I showed you Matthew McConaughey was using.
which I actually, that's a great example of Matthew McConaughey. I mean, I like the the way that he wrote it and just breaking the rules. I think it
Yeah,
was.
breaking the rules. And his is great because it reads in his voice.
Hmm.
So, he has that very slow, pausing voice where he says something and then he comes back with something else. And it's that like the book as you read it is actually written as if he were saying it. You can tell
Hmm.
that like I have a feeling he had a ghostwriter help him, but you can tell that like the ghostwriter wrote it and then somebody who either knows his cadence or he went back and read it, and as he read it, put a paragraph space every time he paused.
Hmm.
And so it starts to feel like it starts to give this engagement with the reader of how the reader is interacting with that, like how the reader starts to feel like they're interacting more with the author even though you're breaking grammar rules. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? Yeah.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
All
those
right,
are
man.
all great suggestions, Jeff.
Oh,
Oh,
good. Well, I'm excited for the stage you're in and for the book to come out.
oh,
I'm
thank you.
I'm gonna hit stop on the recording. You and I can talk a little bit more.
Okay.